All right. So let's start the recording. So welcome everyone to B2B Marketing Futures. In today's podcast, we have an exciting topic, which is using behavioral science in B2B marketing. As our industry becomes increasingly competitive, there is a growing recognition that traditional approaches may no longer be enough to truly connect with these sophisticated B2B buyers. And to help us navigate this discussion, we have a panel of B2B marketing experts, including Nancy Hurhut. So welcome, everyone. Welcome, Nancy.
Happy to
Nancy,
be here.
thank you. Nancy is the author of Using Behavioral Science in Marketing, and we could say she's an expert in getting people to take action. She's known for blending the best of creative approaches with behavioral science to drive response. Her work has earned her and her team over 200 awards, and she's been named one of the 10 most fascinating people in B2B marketing. Welcome, Nancy, again. Welcome to all our guests. And to kick things off, I would love to give a quick round of introductions. Just please saying your name, your role, so our audience can get a little bit better. Mark, would you like to start?
Certainly. Hi, Nancy. Hi, Joachim. Hi, everybody else. Mark Livisic, truly global marketer, not only B2B specialisms, but I have worked across B2B leadership in multiple sectors, hospitality, mobile networks, office and workspace over the last 20 years.
Thank you so much, Mark. Tom?
Hi, everyone. My name is Tom Rivers. I'm currently the head of brand at Speechmatics, a speech technology company. I guess I've spent almost 20 years in the B2B space. I did my own startup, which was a ride. But yeah, since then, where I did a bit of everything, I've been in the marketing space and now brand for B2B companies.
Thank you so much, Tom. Nancy?
Sure. Yeah, you gave me a lovely introduction. Thank you very much. But Nancy Hurhut, I'm the author of Using Behavioral Science in Marketing, and I'm also the co-founder of HBT Marketing, which is a boutique agency here in the States in Boston.
Thank you, Nancy. Mariana?
Yeah, so hello everyone, nice to meet you. And first of all, thanks for the invite. So I'm Mariana Nunes. I'm the digital marketing lead for Pluxy. It's an employee benefits company. And I have a lot of experience in the B2B environment, especially in companies related to technology and software. And I also have some B2C experience, and I believe it's really interesting to see how these two different markets can contribute and work together. And yes, I've been working with digital marketing for almost 20 years now. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mariana. And Catherine?
Yeah, hello. I'm Catherine. I head up the marketing analytics team for Darktrace, which is a cybersecurity company. And sort of for the last really 10 years, I've really been trying to focus on how can I make, behaviors and why people behave like they do and how they behave measurable. And I've done that across, B2B, B2C, and yeah, really excited to be here today.
Welcome. And Birgit?
Hi, my name is Bridget. I'm a social media specialist and consultant, and I've worked for the likes of Intuit, Bazaar Voice, Tech Target, ICW in the last 10 years. So yeah, thanks for having me on board, and nice meeting everyone.
Thank you. Thank you so much. All right. So as I mentioned before, the idea is to have a very organic conversation. I propose to have, we can structure the conversation in two big topics, which is the first question that I would love to ask today is, what do you consider to be the biggest barriers in B2B buying right now? And the second is about your marketing strategies to address these challenges. Where do you see opportunities also to incorporate behavioral science? So who wants to go first and can tell us a little bit about the challenges in B2B buying right now?
So why don't I get going? I think the first challenge we have is the use of that word buying. It's the old adage everybody knows that at any one point in time, there's only about 5% of your target audience are in a buying phase. And an entire organization tends to get drawn into the obsessional focus on that 5%, the immediacy, short-term capture of business from that 5%. I think that's a fundamental flaw. And I think it's a weakness of marketers that we're not being strong enough to actually highlight and address that what we should be doing is investing in the 100% of the addressable audience and building up saliency and association of our brand, our proposition to that audience. The reason for that being is that it's incredibly difficult in a B2B space to actually be on top of the temporal timings of B2B markets, unlike consumers. I was in the hotel sector for a while. Summer holidays, we all know when they're going to be. We all have understood the buying cycle and the selection cycle to a personal holiday. So the temporal timing from a marketing perspective is very, very straightforward and clear. In a business environment, it's a lot grayer. So you actually need to invest, in my view, even more heavily in building brand awareness and brand saliency, because you're not in control of that natural funnel process of purchase.
I mean, I think that's a really astute observation. When we talk about B2B buying, obviously we're focused on that end goal, right? We want to make the sale. We want to make the sale. That's how we're measured. That's how we're compensated, and so that's what we focus on. And I think you're very right. Even when we properly target, and we know that we have the right product or the right service for the people that we're reaching, we still can't guarantee that they're ready to buy. The buying cycles are longer. There are many more people involved, and then there's also this idea that no one wants to make a mistake. And so, to your point, Mark, if we build up the brand so that it owns the right real estate in somebody's mind, when the time is right, they'll go to us because we'll be top of mind, and they'll feel comfortable going to us because we'll be less risky. We won't be that unknown quantity. We'll kind of own that piece of real estate, and whatever particular emotional attributes we want to associate with it, whether it's success or confidence or triumph, or whatever feelings we want, or relief, for example, that we want people to think about when we think about our brand, our product, our service. If we invest some time building that brand, it not only makes the sales message easier to receive, but it also makes it more likely that when people do receive it, they'll act on it, and they'll say, yeah, the timing is right, and this is the right company. So I think that's a really good point. And a lot of times, when it comes to B2B, we do focus on sales and marketing, sales and marketing, sales and marketing, without that necessary component of brand building. And my background is direct marketing. That's where I grew up. So I'm all about making that sale, but I also totally accept and appreciate the need for the branding, and the fact that the branding is going to make the direct marketer's job, the salesperson's job, easier.
Yeah, I have to agree with that. I think I always say that it's important to plant a seed, because you never know when the seed will grow into a tree. And I also think that if you are marketing a certain type of company, by the time the need arises, it's already a little bit too late. So I remember when I was a client enablement exec at Dentsu, they had like a media ecosystem offering. And what we did was we assessed the readiness of our clients, so clients that we've worked with on previous products and such. So what we did was we would assess where they were at in the business and how likely it was for them in the nearby future to need this product offering. And this was something that we would revisit on a yearly basis, and we would include them also in our marketing strategy. So that's what I think. That's why I think that it's important to market to them before their need arises, to kind of do the work beforehand and trying to figure out, this company, they might be there, but I feel like in a few years' time, they might have interest of our product. And I think it's good for them to already know about us before their need arises.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, I think there are a few things from a behavioral science perspective that factor in too. If they're not quite ready to buy, but you want to start to build the brand, you want to start to build that relationship, one thing that we can think about is the reciprocity principle, which is this idea of give to get. So when we give someone, whether or not they even ask for it, but once we've, given them something, it's human nature to feel that people want to respond, right? If you give me something, I feel like I want to return the favor. I want to give you something back. I want to even the score, right? I don't like to feel in debt. And so if we, look at our target market and think, all right, these are things that can be helpful. This is information that could be helpful, guides, cheat sheets,
Mm.
how-to videos, and then as you start to work your way down, perhaps a trial, membership or trial usage. But when we're the first to give, even if someone isn't asking, but we've given them this information, we've made it available, it starts to build that relationship, and it also triggers that idea of reciprocity, where people feel that, all right, now I watched all their how-to videos, I used their guide, I used their cheat sheet, I really should, give them some business in return. And the other thing that comes to mind that I think about is something called availability bias. And that's this notion that people will judge the likelihood of something happening based on how easily they can think of an example. So in our case, the something happening is their need for what we're selling, right? For what we'd like them to buy. And so before we ask them to buy, it makes a lot of sense to first get them to think of a time in the past when, if they'd had been customers of ours, it would have come in handy. Or we get them to imagine a time in the future when they could see themselves benefiting from the product or the service that we have to sell. And that makes them way more open, way more receptive to our marketing message, at a time when, they might have said, oh, no, I don't need that. That's not for me. We're all set. If you first get them to think of a time when, oh, gee, back then, if I had been a customer, that would have been helpful. Or put them in that mindset where they're imagining, oh, it would be so much nicer if I had those benefits. It really does open them up and make them more receptive. So those are a couple of things that we can do as we're, building up to actually making that sale. Before we ask them to buy, first get them to think of a time in the past when it would have been great, or, offer them information, offer them useful tools, so that when the time comes, they've already got that relationship with us. So I think those are a couple of things that we can think about as we start to try to overcome this particular barrier of people not always being ready in the moment that we want to sell them, people not always being ready to buy in that moment.
I think there's sort of two things that kind of, there's like, oh, there's only 5% at any time in the market, or we're meeting them, it's already too late. What I'm finding a lot as well is that we get this notion of, the buyer has evolved as well, especially the B2B buyer is now a lot more complex, the buying process that you find in companies. And that notion that we're still kind of hung up, call them a lead, call them a marketing qualified lead, hung up of this idea that it's that one golden bullet that we need to go after in marketing. And I think I've been, trying to instill a lot that idea of what are actually, those behaviors, those interrelational, effects that are happening between buying groups. And I think we've, coming from my lens a little bit more in that, data world, we've started to try and, do a lot of A/B testing around this. How can we, start to open this up? How can we start to get more sharing going within these groups? And how can we actually identify, those border groups that we tend to forget? Classic example, maybe your procurement team, right? Are we marketing to, our customers' procurement teams? Not really. It's not very sexy to do that. But I think there's a lot, and Nancy, you're smiling, so I'm very curious about what you have to say about this topic. That we can kind of, elevate that a little bit more and make and leverage that.
Yeah, and Catherine, I think you said some really interesting things there. What I heard you say was the buyers are getting more complex. What I heard you say was testing makes sense, and what I heard you say was maybe we should be thinking about marketing to some of these fringe or side or ancillary groups, and you mentioned procurement, and that's what made me smile, because I thought, oh, that's probably everybody's nightmare, right? It's like, oh, if only procurement weren't involved. But of course, procurement is involved. It's a necessary function. And so I think you have a very good point. It's not as straightforward making a B2B sale anymore. Things have evolved. Buyers do a lot more research before they even consider putting you on the short list, before they even will, agree to speak with you or to reach out to you. And so it again speaks to this need of getting the message out there, getting the content out there, getting the helpful information out there, so that they will find us, and then they will way before we find them in a way. So I think that makes sense. The idea of testing also makes a lot of sense. And I think, when you put those two things together, we're thinking about how the buyer is now a little bit more complex, and we're thinking about testing we want to do. I think one of the things that we as marketers, as brands, one of the things that we often do is we think about why somebody should want to buy our product, which makes perfect sense, right? I mean, we're going to put it out in the marketplace. We want to think about all the reasons somebody might want to buy it, all the benefits that they would derive if they bought it. But one of the things that I think we don't spend enough time toying with and exploring is the idea of why someone might not want to buy what we're going to put in the market, and this starts, I think, to help us get at some of the messaging that we should put out there. It's not all about why you should buy it and all the great things that will happen, but we need to think about why somebody might not want to. And as marketers, we need to remove that buying barrier. We need to address, that hesitation, that question that they have, and get that message out there so that we overcome it. And I think that's where some of the testing comes into play. I think that's where some of the targeted messages to various groups start to come into play. And then I would love to hear if you or anyone else have successful experience marketing to procurement, and how that goes, because I myself don't. And I think that it's an interesting idea. Other than, going back to what Mark was saying about building a brand, and when you're doing your brand building activities, I think they start to permeate the marketplace, and even procurement would perhaps be exposed to them. And if they're if they have a favorable impression of us, that can certainly help. But I'm wondering if any of you have directly tried to target procurement with marketing campaigns, and what your experience has been.
So I actually look at it the other way, Nancy, which is, I think you have to neutralize the procurement process.
Okay.
And so essentially, the way I look at it is, procurement are a set of actors within a wider ecosystem on the customer side. Fundamentally, a successful sale, in most cases, in my experience, both being a decision maker, an influencer of decision makers, but also selling on the other side, is arming the people that you have engaged with in building saliency, prominence, association, and some emotional rapport with, so that they're armed to advocate on your behalf through the process. Because when you do that, very often the procurement process literally just becomes a box ticking exercise. And many of you have engaged, and certainly I know the good agencies in marketing land I've worked with, very often if you approach them, the really sharp ones will say, am I actually in the race here, or am I just the third option here to tick a box so that the audit process says there's been due diligence in the selection? Right? And that happens in lots of other sectors, but the marketing agencies seem to be most adept at it of those that I've engaged. So to me, it's about neutralizing procurement. The decision is made before you get to that auditable process, which then comes back to my belief that it's about understanding who your audience is. And critically, I'm sure everybody's read about this, certainly Nancy's written about this, the distinctiveness in B2B over B2C is, in B2B, that decision maker is sitting with risk and the fear of a failed selection and all of the implications that come with that. So, which is why we know then, loss aversion and status quo bias kicks in, that, I'm just going to stick with who I know, because it's the known environment, good, bad, or indifferent. Change, if I'm the advocate of change or the sponsor of change, and the change leads to an inferior experience or perceived experience, I'm at risk. So therefore, I'm going to back off from that. So from my mind, it all comes back to this play in the long game, starting to build up that emotional rapport with the people who are the principal decision makers and influencers of the ultimate decision, given that it's almost always set up to be collective. And off the back of that, making sure they've got the preconditioned answers or data to neutralize whatever the procurement process is, which is then going to navigate you through that. And I think anybody who does that successfully gets the outcome they want. I think if you are late at the time, I can't remember who mentioned it, late at the table in procurement, you're not going to win, because you are essentially that third player at the table. You would have to do something exceptionally confident to change what I would believe is already a decision path that's well made.
And we've mentioned brand and emotional connection now, so I feel like it's probably a good time for a brand person to chip in. I think it probably is true that buyers have got more complex. I think one thing that I spend my time thinking about is, whilst that may be true, there's still people, right? And I think that emotional connection, I think a lot of the time in B2B, we maybe stress too much about the buyers. Well, if the buyers are complex, we feel like that means we need to bombard them with factual information almost immediately. So fantastic product marketing, lots of tables of information, facts and figures, pricing options and things like that. We lead with that, right? And I think what that means is, even if you're in a company that acknowledges that only 5% of people are buying at a given time, and that you need to market to 100% of people, you are just deeply unmemorable. So when it does come to the time to buy, you're almost starting that journey afresh, right? Because you're like, oh yeah, I had seen a bunch of messages over the last 8 months about this, but ask me to name those companies and I can't. Because the way that they tried to connect with me was maybe leading with some of the sort of functional role-based benefits, but it wasn't funny, it didn't connect with me emotionally, and I can't name them, right? So I'm almost approaching that buying journey afresh and like going to review sites and just getting a short list of people that I then have to evaluate, versus companies that I think invest heavily in quality and that emotional connection are almost just like, oh, think of a company that does this. Oh, I saw this hilarious thing by these guys, I should check them out, right? And I think often B2B, at least compared to B2C, just doesn't invest in that process as much, right? And the creativity and time it takes to not only understand who your audience is and what their pain points are, but how you get that across in an original and memorable way that still sticks in mind 10 months later, for example.
Yeah, I love the idea of that kind of memorable experience. So what we're testing, I don't have any sort of end results yet, so I don't know if it worked to get, to win over the procurement team. And in our case, it's also the security teams. Whoever deals with that is probably equally as painful as procurement teams. But we introduced something what we call contacts that matter, which helps us to, somehow quantify who is a contact that matter. And that can be for different companies with different sizes, be different people. And that would include people like your procurement, your security, CISOs and who not. And what we're actually doing is we're going kind of full attack at them to create those memorable experiences. So we bring them along to the experience and we try to bring them along quite early on. So we do, we've just actually had a really successful roadmap series where we took the brand out, but we have to make sure, right, that we're not just getting the classic lead to come along, right? We brought that out quite a lot and was really successful, and we had such great feedback from people like, oh my God, wow, like that whole consistency that we're getting from doctors is so consistent, and seeing that in action live. And you know what, procurement doesn't get invited all the time to some really cool rooftop in what marketers sort of out there all the time. And I think that again, I don't have a long-term study in it, but we are hoping that we are shifting that dial on that brand experience, that consistency element, and then hoping to go a step further where we then can bring them along maybe testimonial journey, right? To really make a stamp into the ground and yes, speak to then, you know, our more regular back to our more regular customers to, you know, almost close the circle of confidence, like, oh, you know what, that procurement person from X really big company has actually is recommending us as well. It's not just, you know, your classic like buyer. And yeah, fingers crossed. I've got good hopes for my test too.
And a really nice little story about this is Speechmatics isn't probably big enough to have a procurement department, but we do have a really tough CFO who asks really tough questions about any buying decision. Like, he's super curious and gets involved. And he is the kind of, if you asked him to his face whether or not he's susceptible to a lot of these like behavioral science stuff, he'd be like, no, it comes down to like ROI. But cue that same CFO being invited along to an evening event by a vendor and coming back with a lovely Lululemon hoodie with their brand on that he has worn every day since, right? And he probably still believes that his future decision would not be influenced by that. But I guarantee him looking at that brand name every day as he puts on the Lululemon hoodie has sunk in somewhere. And when it comes time to kind of make that buying decision, that is the kind of thing that sticks in mind. So yeah.
Yeah, no, it's funny, Tom. I think you just hit on something, and that is we don't make decisions the way we think we do. You know, so we can take a step back and we can say we as marketers, we have to remember that our prospective customers don't make decisions the way we like to think they do. And then we just also think about ourselves as humans. We don't, you know, everyone thinks that they make these very well thought out, well considered decisions. And in marketing, you know, by extension, we think that our customers and our prospects also make these very well thought out, well considered decisions. We're not we're not influenced by marketing. You know, what the advertisers say won't make a difference. You know, I look at the you know, the product and the service for, you know, for quality reasons, and I look at the pricing and I do a cost benefit analysis. You know, we all like to think that that's what happens, but the reality, as you're indicating, is there are other things at play, often that we're unaware of, that influence our decisions. And that's the beauty of you know, applying behavioral science to marketing, because it gives us that window into some of these things that could influence someone's behavior, and it allows us to get out in front of it, to get ahead of it. And even though people will say it you know, didn't influence me, you know, I went to that event, but I, you know, still didn't make a difference, I'm still going to choose the company I think is best. You know, oh yeah, I happen to be wearing this hoodie, but you know, has nothing to do with anything. But it really does. It begins to influence people's perspectives. And you know, and then and Catherine, you had mentioned testimonials, another great way to influence people's perspectives, because you know, people will tell you they don't want to believe what the marketer says, and to a certain extent they are more skeptical of what a marketer says than what a person like them says. So if you can get a testimonial from someone who's very close to the person you're trying to convince, so if the person is in finance, have the testimonial from someone in finance. If the person is in you know, accounting, have it from accounting. Marketing, have it from accounting. If you know, if your target is a CMO, have the testimonial come from a CMO. It seems to work very, very well, because people think, all right, that's someone like me. They've had the same questions, the same challenges, and they feel that this is a good solution. Therefore, maybe I can take that risk too. So it's really, we really have to keep in mind that people don't make the decisions the way we'd like to think, very well thought out, well considered, best for the company. You know, often there are other things at play. And some of those things, and somebody mentioned this, some of those things are, you know, very personal. You know, I think it was Mark, you know, I have my social capital at stake. If I back this solution, we bring it in and it's not any good, it's my head on the chopping block. I'm the one who's going to look like I made a mistake. So therefore, even if, and I've seen research to this effect, even if I believe that this particular company is best, you know, for my company, if I don't think I can get it through, if I think it's going to be too risky, I'll walk away. I'll back somebody else that I don't think is good, but it's a safer choice, or I simply won't make a decision, because that's far, you know, far less risky than bringing in something that's not going to work. So a lot, you know, there's a lot going on beyond those. As Tom was saying, the facts, you know, like here are all the, you know, the facts and the feeds and the speeds and the technical requirements and the, you know, all the things that you would need to know to make this purchase. Yes, you need to know them, but that's not necessarily what makes you make the decision. You make the decisions for the emotional reasons. You justify them with those rational reasons. And keeping that in mind is going to be very helpful for us as we craft the right messages to connect with our audience and to ultimately seal the deal and get that purchase.
And let me share another challenge that I believe it's related with what we are talking now. But on all my past experiences with in the B2B marketing, I was selling products and services that were mandatory for companies. So all companies, they have to have, for example, that software or that system to work. And where I am at the moment, we are selling a product that is not mandatory. It's an employee benefits platform that the companies, they don't have the obligation to give to their employees. So going a step back, this is a big challenge. And I believe here the behavioral science is really helpful because people are not exactly looking to what we provide. We need to show them why it's important for them, how it will help them as a business, why it's important to support your employees. So for me, it's really different comparing with my old experience, my past experience in the B2B environment. And I believe it's something that probably other marketeers, they have the same challenge. So how to show in the B2B marketing that your product is important, even if it's not mandatory.
Yeah, I've actually had some experience doing employee benefits, and it can be a very tough sell on two levels. Selling B2B to get the company to say, yes, we're going to offer these to our employees, and then getting the employees to say, yes, I want to, pay for this. But we'll address the first one because we're talking B2B, and part of it can have part of what can make you successful as you're doing this is to think about what a company or an employer has as their values, what they say they stand for, what they what they believe in, and then track that back to your product. So if they say that they're a people first company, if they say that they that they know that their employees are a large part of their success, you take those words in a way and you play them back, and you remind them of what they said, and they're like, oh yes, we do believe our employees are very important to the success of our company. And then you explain why having these extra benefits will help those employees. And so it's like you get that, we get them to agree to something that they've already stated, yes, that's how I feel. And then you kind of tack what your product or service does onto that. So they would almost be inconsistent if they said, well, no, we don't want that. We believe our employees are very important to the success of our company. And you say, well, we have a product that helps employees, stay healthier, be less stressed about their finances, have better, work-life balance, whatever the particular product is. And, and as a result, it will help your employees. And if you believe in your employees and you think that they're the most important reason for your company's success, how could you not do something that would help employees? So that's one way to go at it. The other way to go at it is to reframe it so that it's not this soft, wonderful, nice to have thing, but it has a bottom line impact on the company. Because if people are healthier, there are fewer sick days, there's greater productivity, there's increased morale, all of which affects the bottom line. So, you're not doing this to be nice, you're doing this because there's a real return on the investment. So it's getting people to maybe think of that voluntary benefit differently. So that's a couple of things that I've used with some of my clients that have worked pretty well.
Yeah, I would. So the way it's a piece of well-known research, the von Restfeld effect, which is humans remember standout content. So the way I always describe it to team members of mine is nobody remembers getting pat on the back. Everybody remembers getting punched in the face. So I ask them and I've actually adapted it and said maybe kissed on the lips, but depending on your preference. But it becomes a memory, right? And that's what you're trying to do, is build memory and recall. So what I would suggest for yourselves, and in an area where you perceive it's a proposition that isn't mandatory or a priority, it is creating that impact that you're not going to get a trigger the first time, but it's repeat. One trick I've put together and used over a good number of years is a checkpoint of pulling apart your core market engagement proposition. So pull out all of the image bank that you have and all your competitors use, put it on a page in isolation. pull out all of the colors and color and DNA codes that you have in your competitors, put that on a page. Pull out your headlines and claims, put them on a page, and then pull out the framing for the different actors that are consequential for you and put them in isolation on a page. 9 times out of 10, when I've done this, you can't tell one from the next. It's a sea of sameness. And I do this all the time when I'm trying to convince investment and marketing with my peers around an executive table to say, you know, nobody can tell what our product is because we're just speaking the same language, presenting the same way as everybody else. You have to have a point of differentiation. And ideally, if you get to a point of on every single one of those different optics, you've got a point of differentiation, you then have the punch in the face in the market that's going to make you stand out, both with your competitors, but also to your point where it might be a proposition that there's a perception it's not so critical to be assessed or considered, or it's lower in a priority and investment cycle. So that would be one. The other one, which plays, I think, against a point Nancy speaks to, and is very familiar in behavioral sciences, and we all know this, you have 7 seconds to make a first impression. So whatever your proposition is, go look at every touch point you have, and are you grabbing a positive recall within 7 seconds? And if you're not, throw it out and go do it again until you figure something out that will. And that's the stuff that starts to seed and sit in minds, right? You know, I'm an executive. I have to make decisions and have done for a good while. Many of you will do the same. It's these things that when you're commuting or you're in the gym or you've got that moment that there's just something gnawing in your mind that suddenly it becomes something which is going on your priority list. And fundamentally for me, that's our job in the B2B space, is get in the mind of the decision makers and the influencers that we're something that needs to go on that priority list, whether it's for this week, this year, the next investment cycle.
I think on that point of differentiation, I think that's sort of, we get to hear that all the time in here. And I think one thing that we found very useful as a team is, to go out and look at, we still call them peers, but we really mean, leaders in the digital space and the event space. We're talking about the Netflixes and the Spotifys of the world, and how are they actually doing this, and what can we actually learn from some of those, I'm going to say cool B2C activations, and what do they have that I don't have, which then ultimately means, yeah, I'm just a bit the samey. And to be honest, we're quite bad, I think, in the cybersecurity space. We're all about, oh my God, this threat, and it's very negative overall. And I think, slowly, getting us out from there by drawing in, what works for others. I guess I've kind of got a question for you, Nancy. I know you're talking about loads of different behavior frameworks. Do you actually see that B2B marketers, are we getting better at adapting some of them, and are some others maybe lacking behind? And where do you think we've actually gotten, a bit of a long way, and where do we have a bit more homework to do as sort of B2B marketers?
I think that's a good question. I think that B2B is beginning to catch up to B2C, where B2B is starting to borrow some of the things that they know work in business to consumer, and as a result, making inroads. But we still, as B2B marketers, have a little ways to go, maybe a little bit more than a little ways to go. But I think we're starting to get there. I think back to my goodness, it's got to be almost 10 years ago. GE did a really interesting series of video marketing messages, and they were like really trying to like demonstrate how powerful they were and the cool things they were doing. And there was one execution that really stood out. It was something about a snowball's chance in hell, where they constructed this container to put a snowball in, and then they put the snowball in the container, and they put the container in this forge that just had this fire, with molten metal. And the idea was to see if, after they immersed it, when they pulled it out, would the snowball have melted, or would it have survived? And they were demonstrating the technology and the materials they use, I think, for aircraft parts. And so they did this incredible, almost Netflix quality video, and you're like, the suspense is building and the emotion is in there, and you're like, what's going to happen? And and then obviously they pull it out, and there's the snowball still intact. And I thought that was a wonderful example of incorporating some storytelling and some of the techniques that we see regularly in B2C, but in a B2B environment. And I mean, I think that almost goes to the point about the von Restorff effect. We notice and remember things that are different, things that stand out. And if all the other B2B advertising out there is very predictable and expected and dare I say boring, the thing that's got the emotion and the storyline and just that, the unusual visuals and the unusual angle, that's the thing that's going to stand out. That's going to get your attention. That's going to get remembered. So I think we're in B2B, we're starting to do that, but we haven't quite caught up yet. We still need a little bit more of the drama, the emotion, the storytelling, and maybe I think another area that we're lacking is what we call cognitive fluency. And it's this idea that people uh, prefer things that are easier to think about and easier to understand. And in B2B, we sometimes get caught up in our own language, our acronyms. We feel like, well, we're selling a very expensive product to a very sophisticated audience. And so we have to have run-on sentences, and we have to use big words, and we have to use all this industry nomenclature. And there have been studies, study after study after study, that shows that even if you're selling to the B2B environment, in the B2B environment, even if you're selling to very sophisticated audiences, people still prefer things that are easy to understand. They prefer simpler language. They don't want to have to, even if they can, they don't want to have to spend a lot of time thinking. So anything that we can do to to make our messages land more easily, to use simpler language, to use explanatory graphics, to to use simile, to use metaphor, just to and stories, to make it easier for people to grasp our message, that it goes a long way. And I think that's an area that we're still lagging behind in. When we need to do more of that. And it's not only that people prefer things that are easier to think about and easier to understand, they have a tendency to believe them more. And of course, that's critical if we want to make a sale. People have to believe us, they have to trust us. And people feel more confident in their ability to make a decision about things that they feel they understand, things that are cognitively fluent. And that's also critical for us, because if people don't feel confident in their ability to make a decision, what are they going to do? They're not going to make the decision, right? So anything we can do to make our messages easier to understand. There was a research study that Oppenheimer did, and he took uh, PhD thesis abstracts. And in some cases, people read the abstract just the way it was written. In other cases, every time he saw a word that was 9 letters or longer, he removed it and replaced it with a shorter synonym. And people read those. People not only found the versions with the shorter synonyms easier to understand, they actually rated the author as smarter. So, here's a perfect case where using simpler language actually makes you appear more intelligent. So I think that's one of the areas where in B2B we should double down a little bit more strongly, use a little bit more cognitive fluency. But by and large, to your original question, I think we are beginning to borrow some tactics from B2C, but there's still room to borrow more.
Why
I have
is,
oh, sorry.
sorry, why is that hard to get the internal buy-in to be more creative in B2B? Because in B2C, at least in my experience, maybe my company was really innovative in all the strategy, but it was super evident that if you wanted to get to the sales targets, you really needed to invest in marketing and also in being different, in being creative. But why in B2B this is not the case, and we need to apply all these strategies that Mark was like mentioning before? Why is so hard?
Well, I mean, I can answer, although I think the other panelists are probably in a better position to answer because they're making these decisions. But I think fear. It's like, all right, this is not selling beer or donuts. It's not an impulse purchase. It's not an inexpensive purchase. It's and we're talking about and give my, my professional capital because I made them laugh. Do it because I listed, all these good reasons. And
Nancy,
all the benefits and the features and the advantages, and that's why.
Nancy,
So
sorry for interrupting
I think that's one of the
you.
reasons.
I think
Go ahead.
your internet went down for a second. I don't know if maybe it's my connection or.
No, there was a loss for a couple of seconds.
A couple of seconds, just to let you know, but I think you are back now.
Sorry about that. I'm glad I'm back. I'm sorry about that. What I'm saying was, we feel that if you're of money, and you're going to convince multiple decision makers to spend a lot of money for your product or service, you can't laugh. You have to adding all the legitimate reasons, and I think that's why B2B advertising is often the way it is. But I'd love to hear from some of the others and what their experiences are.
So I have like an interesting experience when I was recording webinars for our clients who sold their products to accountants at the ICAW. And there was like 2 people from one company. One was very experienced in webinars and, was saying, oh, I don't need practice. I've done this like 1,000 times. And the other one was very humble and was like, oh, I'm not sure how I'm going to do, this is my first time. So I remember listening to them as the webinar was being recorded and they were, pitching their product and so forth. And the one that was more experienced, used a lot of jargons, big words, and long sentences. And the other one, his approach was way more humble. Maybe because he was a little bit more unsure. He used just like everyday language. Obviously, he was very knowledgeable. But what I thought was interesting was at the end of every webinar, we would actually ask them how they found the speakers, and everyone actually preferred the inexperienced guy who presented. And I thought that was so interesting because they were all obviously business owners as well. And I thought that was so interesting that the person who had done webinars so many times wasn't actually the one that stood out, but it was the other person. And I think when I was doing webinars, one of the things I would always say is that your webinar has to be digestible, even if they don't look at the screen. So try and not use so many words on the screen, but make it make sense even if they're not looking at the screen, just because obviously the decision makers, they're busy. So maybe they are listening to the webinar, but they're doing other things whilst they're listening. So I just have to agree with you in terms of like making sure that the content that we're producing is easily digestible, just because these people are busy and they're multitasking a lot of the time.
Yeah, I think related to that, I always view B2C as far more sort of Darwinian, right? There's very few things in a consumer's life that are like must-haves that you have to buy. But a lot of the time in organizations, it's part of somebody's job to buy this stuff. And sometimes they literally have to invest in it, either for legal reasons or it's just like an essential piece of software. So I think maybe that gives a bit more room for it's less sort of winner takes all, right? Not that every consumer product is like your first or consigned to history, but I think it is much more Darwinian, and that forces competition, which leads to innovation, which leads to like cut through. And a lot of the time in the B2B space, you can have a very reasonably sized, successful, profitable business while still not cutting through, and maybe that's where a lot of people feel quite comfortable perhaps, but again, other people might have a good take on why that's the case.
I'm gonna say that as the data person, but I also think, and we certainly do that across all of my campaign reports, it's very much a focus of, what did that do for the business? How many leads did I get? How much money did I get from that? So we have very rigid attribution models in place, which I don't think help us all too much, because it's like we're almost going into self-fulfilling prophecy a little bit the wrong direction. And it actually was very, very interesting sort of inside our company. We do actually have super top buy-in to, experience with the brand to really bring it to life. But then ultimately, we're also looking at reports which measure, you know, leads as the ultimate outcome of all of that. So I think as a data person, calling myself maybe a modern data person, I see it as my job to change that, right? I don't like the fact that it's kind of data versus creative in a way. And I think creatives feel very often that, oh, because something gets measured, it means it can't be creative. But I very much see that these two things actually go hand in hand, right? We talked about A/B testing, which I think is a brilliant way to bring these two worlds together. And it's not about me out measuring you and telling you what needs to be written on there. It's about us finding out what works best to get audience A to do thing B and things like that. And I think there's really, you know, a little bit that mindset shift from both sides, right? From the more data-driven people in marketing, in B2B marketing, but also from that creative world, you know, coming a little step closer to us and be very curious about, hey, what can I measure? What can I prove? These are my assumptions. That's what I'm hearing. That's what I'm learning from, you know, how creative needs to be done. Can we test this versus that old format? So I think there's a lot of, you know, as a mindset shift and workshops and whatnot that needs to happen to bring those teams a little bit closer as well in the B2B world.
Yeah, I love that. There was so that kind of blend of creative and data, I think, is super important. I don't know if anyone else saw, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, was sort of analysis of Nike's kind of fall from grace, and they seem to have kind of shifted all of their thinking to measurable ROI, data-driven marketing, and taken their foot off historically what had made Nike almost untouchable, which was incredible brand campaigns that just stuck in the mind for years afterwards. And those effects were being felt by Nike just taking its, you know, losing market to the likes of Lululemon and On Running and things like that, who really shouldn't have had a right to enter into the markets that Nike was so strong into. And I think that's a really interesting case study in a consumer brand being too focused on efficient, measurable marketing activities and not thinking about their audience and kind of brand building. But yeah, if you haven't read it, highly recommended, super interesting. But yeah, I think that speaks to that blend of brands plus data.
And I think on top of that, the other thing is, and we've touched on it several times on this discussion, in the B2B environment, the selling side is very aware of the procurement process and is very familiar with needing to meet an ROI proposition. So it becomes this battle of features and function lists. I mean, we all see it, right? They're just blasting out line after line of jargon and references to things, which in the consumer space just in the main doesn't happen, right? If you're selling a t-shirt, if you're selling a chocolate bar, if you're selling a smartphone, you know, the reason Apple dominates the smartphone, I was in the middle of it, why they broke in was because everybody else was rolling out these huge long feature function technical lists, 99% of which the consumer didn't understand and didn't care about. Apple came out and they still do it now, each new release focuses on one thing. And they know that one thing is something which they can feed the FOMO on consumers to want to get. And then the rest of it is just hygiene. And so I think what happens in B2B space and to the B2B marketers is they get drawn in alongside this secondary challenge, which is, of course, if you're consumer marketing, you don't tend to have a very strong sales representation and voice at the table, right? The brand management are the strong voice. The strong voice in a B2B environment, you tend to have sales teams and account managers who are very strong and vocal, back to the point that Anne-Catherine was making about, you know, how many leads have we got? What demand have we generated like tomorrow? Have we got stuff for the salespeople to do? And they're wired in on, well, I need my big brochures and my long lists of technical reference things. And so it just then perpetuates this non-emotive based selling over to a functional sale, which is, it leads you astray. So to my mind, what anybody needs to do now is to say, okay, you're not going to get rid of that. So you have to moderate and meet that. And that comes back to my point of before of neutralizing procurement process. So you give your sales teams, your account managers, your hunters, the confidence that they've got the materials that gives them confidence to do the job when they get in front of a prospective customer. But then you say to them, me getting you in front of that prospective customer is my specialism, and I'm going to do the things that you might not understand. And actually, I don't need you to understand, because I will need you to focus on your part of the journey and your role in the team. And that, for me, is what B2B marketers need to strengthen on. They need to spend more time looking at what the B2C people are doing and transitioning it across. And I think that will then set people up for success. And there's lots and lots of great examples. The GE one is a super nice one. Coming back to, I think, which is Tom's domain more than any of ours, branded content, rich content video is an area that I think needs to be hugely invested in by B2B marketers right now, not in the future, but get on it now. And then the second one, which I think is going to be a huge opportunity for any smart B2B marketer, is we're about to go through a seismic shift in how people proactively search for knowledge, right? We've spent the last 20 years in the search bar, and then we've got our our scroller death of options of where we go next. We're now moving across. Obviously, people like Google are really leading it with SGE. We're going to get into this conversational, explorative, interactive world of knowledge searching and knowledge presentment. And I actually think it's a huge opportunity for B2B if they do it smartly and do it right. And some of the points that Nancy's talked about critically with choice architecture, keeping language simple, not going super technical, super quick, that you're going to build up a lot of real positive engagement opportunities.
Yeah, I love that. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to say that we are coming to an end, unfortunately. And it's been a great conversation, but please, I would love to give one more minute to everyone if you want, if you can stay a bit longer to say a couple of words and your learnings or a last question. But thank you so much.
Thank you. This has been really wonderful. I've totally enjoyed meeting all of you. I've loved the points that you've made, everything from, not doing things the way they've always been done, borrowing more from B2C and pulling that into B2B. The last point about the impact that AI is going to have on search. How do you sell a product when it's voluntary, and the different strategies and approaches that are needed versus when someone just kind of has to, neutralizing procurement. I love that phrase. The need to do more testing. I think so many rich ideas have come out of today's conversation, and I want to say thank you. I've really enjoyed it, and I want to encourage you to keep thinking the way you are, and to keep looking for opportunities to embed some behavioral science, because people don't always make the most well thought out, well considered decisions, and as a result, we as marketers have the opportunity to influence those decisions by using behavioral science. So I've thoroughly enjoyed today. Thank you all so much.
Thanks, Nancy. Lovely to talk with you.
Thank you so much, Nancy, and thank you, everyone. It's been a great conversation. I hope I can see you all in person on the 24th of September. We're going to meet in London. Nancy, you are, of course, super invited. We will love to have you in London that week. Yeah, we will, to keep the conversation going, to keep talking about brand and how important it is for our industry, and how can we use all the amazing techniques that you have shared with us today, Nancy. So thank you so much. Lovely to see you.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.